Hi, my name is Karen Verspoor, and I'm the Dean of the School of Computing Technologies at RMIT University. This morning, I'm pleased to be hosting RMIT alum Hugh Williams. Hugh will be speaking about careers in IT, and we're going to have a great chat about all the opportunities that await you if you come and study computing or IT at RMIT. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders, past and present. We acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business and where we meet you from today. Next slide, please. At RMIT, we take this journey with reconciliation and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia very seriously. And when you're at RMIT, you are encouraged to take advantage of many of the cultural artifacts that we have around campus, including this artwork that you see in front of you on the slide today. We're working with the principles of Bunjil and changing our ways of knowing, working, and being. So with that, welcome, Womanjika. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Hugh Williams. Hugh is an advisor, investor, and former tech executive. Through his advisory practice, he has worked with companies such as DoorDash, Moonpig, and Ocado. He's also the co-founder of CS in Schools and a professor at the Melbourne Business School. Hugh was formerly an engineering vice president at Google, where he led Google Maps, and also held previously roles in senior product and engineering at eBay and Microsoft. He has a PhD in computer science from RMIT University, and we're very proud of the journey that he's taken. So with that, I'd like to welcome Hugh to tell us as much as he can for the time that in the time allows about this amazing and incredible journey that he's had in IT. Welcome, Hugh.
Thanks, Karen. It's a really great privilege to have the opportunity to speak to you all. An enormous privilege to get the chance to participate in RMIT's Open Day. So if I could just have the next slide, please. So I thought I'd start with some ancient history. I don't think I look like this anymore. Certainly my hair's a lot grayer these days, but this is when I first got involved in computing. I'm thinking I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, and I don't have a photo of my first computer, but I was very, very lucky because my dad actually built one. So he had a copy of this radio electronics magazine. Inside it had the circuit diagrams for a computer, and so he went literally out to the shed and built us one. And this predated, all of the computers that I'm sure you're familiar with. So I was lucky enough when I was 7 or 8 years old to have a computer in my house. And I was probably the only person in regional Victoria. I lived in Sale who had a computer, and I was probably the only kid for a couple of 100 kilometres in any direction who had one. And this just set me off on a life journey. I discovered I was very, very lucky. I mean, I was lucky not only to be born in Australia and have the parents that I have, but to discover my passion really, really early in life. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you my first real computer. So this is the good old Dick Smith System 80. Now, for those of you of a certain generation, you may remember the Radio Shack or Tandy TRS-80. This was the cheap version. So this always had problems. My poor old dad was always opening this up and soldering parts in it and trying to get it going again. But it was a fantastic machine. But it was really the first personal computer that you could buy and have in your house. And at this point in my life, in Sale, I discovered that there was one other person like me. This guy who's about 4 years older than me was also sitting in his house programming one of these things, and we sort of formed our own computing club. And on the weekends, we'd kind of get together and write games and do all the kinds of things that kids do with computers. But it was a pretty lonely existence in Sale. And then when I got to the end of high school, I had this real passion for computing, and I wanted to go and study it somewhere. And I did probably exactly what you're doing today, and that is I explored all of the universities in Melbourne and tried to make a choice about the university that was right for me. Obviously, these were pre-COVID times. This is a long time ago. And I was lucky enough to go into RMIT University and take a look around the computer science department as it was known then. And that was a fantastic experience. I remember the open day very, very well. I remember going into one of the rooms on the campus and they had a robotic arm, and this robotic arm was moving chess pieces. And this was mind-blowing. You know, I'd been a sort of a software person fiddling around in Sail, and now I sort of saw software connected to hardware and this thing playing chess, and I wondered how possibly a computer could play chess. And I just thought, wow, this is incredible. You know, what an amazing institution, what an opportunity this is that's in front of me. And so I went back to Sail and I completely changed my preferences. I put computer science at RMIT as my #1 preference. And I made a few good decisions in my life. I'll tell you about a couple more of them in a second, but this is absolutely probably the most important decision I made in my life, and that was to go study computer science at RMIT and get a formal education in computing to build on that passion that I developed as a kid. And that really set my life off in the direction that I'm going to tell you about in a moment. I actually studied computer science at RMIT. I then went and did a startup. They called them companies back then, but I went and started my own little company. I did that for a while. And then I went back to RMIT University and studied for a PhD in computer science. And then long chain of events, became an academic at RMIT, where I was lucky enough to teach. So lifelong association with RMIT, and you know, I have enormous gratitude for what the university's enabled me to do in my career. But let me tell you about the end of my time at RMIT, which is on the next slide. So I was sitting in my office one day at RMIT, working in the computer science department, and this email turned up. This is really the original actual email. And I was pretty sure this one was spam. You know, if you're looking at your inbox and you get an email from Bill Gates, you probably don't think that that's a real email. But this was coincidental with the time when I'd been exploring what I wanted to do next in my career, and it really is an email from Bill. And this was pretty much a change in direction in my life for me, and this is probably the email that sealed the deal. It's not very often you get an email from somebody who's been, you know, so formative in the computing industry, and he obviously went to some trouble to share why I should come and work at Microsoft. So back in the early 2000s, I left RMIT, packed up from Australia, took my very young family and moved over to the United States, where I worked for almost 13 years. And my first job on the next slide was at Microsoft, and I was lucky enough to help them build an image search engine. And this was at a time when Google's image search was very popular. So this is around 2003 or 4. And you know, at this point in time, Google is a well-known household brand, and they've got image search on the web and everybody's using it. And we at Microsoft are trying to build a competing search engine, which later became Bing, to go and compete with Google. And I was put in charge of working on the image search product. This is definitely the most exciting time in my career. Enormously fond memories of this particular time. I worked with a small team, as a super diverse, heterogeneous team of people, some old people, some young people, some women, some men, people from all over the world. A really interesting little small team of about 6 or 7 folks. And we're up against Google, and we've got to build what we hope is the best image search engine in the world. What we knew at that point in time, though, was it was going to be very, very hard to beat Google with their 6-year head start in sort of the fundamentals of image search. So it was going to be hard to be in more countries than them. It was going to be hard to have better results for every query than them. It was going to be hard to be faster than them in returning results. But what we thought was maybe it's possible to build a better user experience than Google had at the time. And you'll probably remember back in those days, if you're of that age, that image search looked a lot clunkier than it does today. So every image had a piece of text underneath it. All the images were on single pages, and you had to go down the bottom and press next, next, next to go through all of those images. And we decided we'd reimagine how image search would work, and this is a screenshot of the image search that we built. And what's particularly exciting about this image search, and something I'm enormously proud of, is that it has infinite scroll. And what that means is that you can scroll down forever and see more and more images without ever running into a boundary between pages. And this was the first time that had ever been done. So I'm lucky enough to be one of the patent holders of this idea of infinite scroll. And if you use the web, you use things like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of those things now, they all have infinite scroll, right? So you can scroll forever and never run into a page boundary. But this was the first product ever online that did that. And you can see it's a nice, clean, simple interface. So it was a really interesting time for me, sort of bringing that computer science experience together with some innovation inside a large company at Microsoft trying to compete with Google. The rest's history, really. If you go to the next slide, I've got a screenshot of Google's image search. And while the images are bolder and brighter and they're a little bit more tessellated, you can see that our image search is really the grandparent of the modern image searches that you see today. So most of the things that are out there online really can trace their heritage back to that exciting time that I was lucky enough to be part of at Microsoft. I stayed at Microsoft for about 5 years. I was lucky enough to run about half of their search engine team, worked on image search, video search, news search, web search, and had an amazing time growing an organization and really trying to compete head to head with Google. In the late 2000s, though, I decided to take a new job and I moved from Seattle, Washington, which was the headquarters of Microsoft, down to the headquarters of eBay in California, which is shown on the next slide. And at eBay, I had a great time working on the world's largest marketplace at the time. It's a super exciting problem. You're bringing millions of sellers from around the world with all the inventory and things that they want to sell. You're bringing those folks together and you're connecting them to all the buyers out there in the world, of which there's tens of millions, and making sure that people get a great experience buying great products at the right price, in the right condition, and shipped to them when they need it. So enormously complex problems, sitting on hundreds of millions of items from millions of sellers, working for tens of millions of buyers and trying to connect those folks in an efficient way. It was a really interesting time at eBay. We did a lot of hard technical work around rebuilding the search engine, building recommendations, so helping people find things that were like the things they were looking at. And that's something you're very familiar with today, particularly if you use something like Netflix. You're often recommended shows that are similar to the shows that you like. We did that in the world's largest marketplace. So if you're looking at something, we show you other things that might be equivalent or might be a good addition to the thing that you're interested in buying. So big team, hard problems, massive scale, and a really, really interesting time. Stayed at eBay for about 5 years. Then I did a couple of other things and finally landed at Google, which is on the next slide. And I've, of course, been competing with Google back at the start of my career in the US, working on image search, but in the end, I ended up working for Google after they really sort of won the search wars. And I think Karen said it in the introduction, you know, I was lucky enough to work on Google Maps and to look after the product and engineering parts of Google Maps. Super interesting problem, of course, very interesting problem space. And a very complex and large organisation. Had to manage 7 offices around the world, and you actually had a couple of offices in Sydney and Zurich who never overlapped in time zones, and so couldn't actually have a meeting together live because they worked completely different hours. A team in Japan, teams all over the US, but folks all over the world working very, very hard to build the product you know as Google Maps. And it's an amazingly innovative and interesting product, right? So Google has mapped the whole world down to every post box, telephone booth, building, shop, their opening hours, and everything that you could be interested in the whole world. They've taken satellite photography of the whole world. They've taken the street view imagery that gives you the feeling and vibe of the locations that you're in. And then they're overlaying with that real-time information that helps you understand the conditions in the places that you're living in. And of course, the most obvious one of those is traffic. And the traffic is super important when it comes to helping you get from A to B, because traffic allows you to know which roads are the best ones to travel on. So even if you're commuting into university and home or into school and home every day, it's super useful to have the traffic because that can route you around car crashes and traffic snarls that might stop you efficiently getting to work. So that was an incredibly interesting job. And after that, I decided to move back to Australia entirely for personal reasons. I wanted to get back to where my family's from, give my kids the opportunity to go to university in Australia and get back closer to my parents. And of course, it's been an enormous privilege after that long journey in the US to also get the opportunity to come back to RMIT University and be part of helping around RMIT. So if we just move on to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about a couple of the things that I've been working on in recent times. So this is, maybe I'll let the video play for a second, if it's going to play. So perhaps we'll pause the video there and let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in this video. So I'm lucky enough today to work for a company called Ocado. It's one of the part-time things that I do in my life. And these folks are building a really incredible product that's an intersection between robotics and software. And what you saw in that video was a series of robots actually collecting people's grocery orders. So those robots are traveling around a grid, and beneath that grid are all the products that you can possibly buy in groceries. So, you know, eggs, milk, bread, cans of food, all those kinds of things sit below the robots in a grid. And the robots travel around that grid and they look for the products that are supposed to be in your order. They then pick those products up in a big tote, a crate, and they take those over to what's called a pick station, where the items are taken from the crate and put actually into the plastic grocery bags to assemble people's orders. When those orders are assembled, they're packed very carefully into trucks, and then those trucks go out and deliver the groceries. So an incredibly interesting ecosystem designed to really drive efficiency into the whole of grocery delivery. You may know, if you know something about Ocado, that they've signed a very large deal with Coles, and they're busy right now together with Coles building large warehouses in Sydney and Melbourne. So you can expect within a couple of years, when you order through Coles online, for your groceries to actually be picked and packed by the robots that you saw in that video. What I'm particularly excited about is the sustainability element of what Ocado does. You will typically find that grocery stores, you know, a Coles or a Woolworths, perhaps waste around 5 or 6% of the fresh food produce that's put through their stores. It's very difficult for them to make sure that things are sold and to estimate, you know, how much people want to buy. Ocado's got that down to under 0.5%, which is incredible. So 10 times better at making sure that grocery isn't wasted. And I think they also do a fantastic job of making sure you get the best, freshest produce to your door when you get it. So an incredibly interesting problem with a nice sustainability element, and really, really exciting thing to be working on today. Something else that I've just finished working on is DoorDash. And some of you, I'm sure, have heard of DoorDash. It's another one of the part-time things that I'm lucky enough to do today. DoorDash is available in Australia. They are a food delivery service. So if you're anywhere in Australia, you can probably use DoorDash to get your food delivered for dinner or lunch or breakfast or whatever it is. They compete directly head-to-head with folks like Uber Eats and Deliveroo. They are, though, the largest food delivery business in the United States. So more than half of the food delivery in the United States is powered by DoorDash. And again, super interesting problem to be working on. So it's a little bit like eBay in some sense. You know, eBay had buyers and sellers and they're getting connected together to transact. In this particular case, though, there's 3 parties involved. There's restaurants who have food, there's the drivers who do the delivery, and of course there's you, the end consumer, who wants the product. And so really interesting technical problem trying to bring together food, drivers and demand, and making sure that you get a great experience as a customer, and that restaurants are able to use the platform to build a larger, bigger, more successful business, and particularly a business that makes better use of the facilities that they own. So trying to fill in that gap, for example, between lunch and dinner, how do you do that? They have all of these resources and people. How do you create more demand in the middle of the afternoon between the lunch shift and the dinner shift is something restaurants are really excited about, and something that DoorDash tries hard to help them do. So I'm still lucky today to not just be working for one company, but to be working, across the globe on a bunch of problems. And I think, again, that opportunity was created not just through the experience in the United States, but through that really important grounding at RMIT University when I made that choice. So I thought I'd just end with a few sort of comments on the future and why now is still a great time to be doing computer science. So on the next slide, I've just got a picture, and this picture is meant to represent the Internet of Things. And what I mean by that is that everything will have a computer in it soon. If you think back to the story at the very beginning, I had one computer in my house built by my dad, and then I was lucky enough to have an unreliable personal computer that needed soldering every now and then. When I ended up at Microsoft, we had tens of thousands of computers in data centers to power our search experience. But today, there are millions, if not billions, of computers in the world, and everything that you know and use is probably going to have a computer in it soon. And so I think as a computer scientist, as somebody who gets the opportunity to get involved in this field soon, you're going to have the opportunity to change just about everything, because everything will have a computer in it. And everything will not only just have a computer in it, but all of those computers will be connected and coordinated. So I think we're moving into a very interesting time where you can change just about anything that's physical because it's connected to the internet and it has a computer in it. So you can help shape whatever that is. And hopefully your imagination is running wild at that possibility. On the next slide, another thing that I think is pretty interesting is this sort of world of virtual reality and augmented reality. I find these headsets that people put on to do virtual reality a little kind of dorky. I think they're a little bit unwieldy. I sometimes find when I put them on that the vision lags a little bit behind my motion and they make me feel sick. So I'm not sure that these quite are yet the most revolutionary devices or the most fun devices, or they're going to be the most ubiquitous devices. But I do think, as I show on the next slide, that virtual reality's cousin, augmented reality, is going to be incredibly interesting. That's not my slide. That's interesting. You will, oh yes, maybe it is. You will, anyway, you will find in places like IKEA very, very soon, the ability to take furniture virtually that they're trying to sell and bring that into your lounge room. So you can imagine holding up your camera, moving your camera around the room and actually seeing the IKEA furniture situated within your room, and being able to kind of go up to it, look at it from different angles and really understand whether that fits well within your environment, and using that to make a purchase decision. You can obviously think about that in lots of other ways too. So in shopping, I think it's going to be incredibly powerful. So you can imagine trying on clothes without actually trying on the clothes and checking the fit and the look of those things. I think that's really interesting. But I think where this gets incredibly powerful is allowing people to do things that require them to be in one location, but to be able to simulate that in multiple locations. So imagine that you're a doctor doing surgery, but you're located in a major capital city and the patient's located somewhere else. I think that'll be possible in our lifetime, that you'll be able to sit in an environment that's simulated where you feel like you're with the patient, but it's actually a robotic arm carrying out the surgery somewhere else. So I think this ability to sort of immerse yourself in an environment and interact in that environment when that environment isn't real, I think that will be super, super interesting. And then one more on the next slide that I think's incredibly useful. Oh, here we go. You can see the IKEA version here. Somebody experiencing the chair. There you go. It gives you a sense for those pieces of equipment within the environment without purchasing them, so you can kind of see what the coffee table would look like, or the rug, or the table, or the chair. You get the idea. And then one more thought for you on the next slide of something that I think is going to be really transformational, and you could help build if you're a graduate from RMIT University. Let me just end the video and jump on to the next one. So on the next slide, I've got a picture that's meant to represent a marketplace, so a giant marketplace. eBay is a marketplace, of course. It's about connecting, tens of millions of sellers with hundreds of millions of buyers in a vibrant trading environment. DoorDash is a marketplace. It's about connecting drivers and restaurants to you as a food consumer. There are lots and lots of other marketplaces out there, but what marketplaces are about is driving efficiency into inefficient things. So I could imagine, for example, somebody inventing a really powerful global parking marketplace. So rather than you having to go and find a council park that takes up half the road, that's incredibly inefficient, you could perhaps book a parking spot that's not being used by somebody who lives in that place, or somebody who owns an office there who's got a spare park. And you can imagine these parking spaces being really efficiently used and everybody being happy. The people who need to park getting a great deal exactly where they need it, and the people who've got this unused asset, their parking space, at some time in the day, making a few extra dollars from the parking space that they have. You could imagine things like laundry, getting your laundry done, getting your ironing done. You can think of all kinds of things that are a little bit inefficient, where you want a problem solved, and perhaps you've got a little bit of extra money and a little bit of time that's precious to you, and there's somebody else who wants that money and who's got a little bit of time spare, and those things being connected in really efficient ways. So I think marketplaces are starting to change the world. Some of the biggest companies today on the planet are marketplaces, but I think there's a lot more room to run in the marketplaces area. And again, if you're a computer scientist, you're a graduate from RMIT, you've got a business mind, then I think you can really start to create the future. So there's three themes that I'm really excited about over the next little while. And I think now is a fantastic time to choose RMIT, get this fundamental grounding in computer science and software engineering, and then actually go out and change the world. And I believe that every industry is going to be impacted by software over the next 10 or 15 years. There are some industries that have been slow to be disrupted, things like health, education itself, insurance, banking, these kinds of places, but you're starting to see them get disrupted. And I think they'll be disrupted for the better of consumers. And I think it will be software people, graduates from RMIT, who get the opportunity to go and do this and be part of these kinds of revolutions. So it's a great time to be you, is the summary of my talk. I've had a great career, still enjoying it, but I think now is absolutely the right time to make the choice to come to RMIT, study computing, and create the future. So with that, I'll draw my formal part of the presentation to a close, and I'll look forward to perhaps getting some questions from you and also having a chat with Karen.
Thanks so much, Hugh. That was amazing. And your journey is so dynamic and incredible. And it all started when you were 8, right? I mean, that's the most amazing thing. And I think that's true for a lot of people of our generation, perhaps in computing, that we kind of got that bug early. It's probably, worth reflecting on that a little bit. Do you feel like, today it's necessary to have that kind of early start in computing, or is it okay to be 18 and realize, hey, I actually want to do this, even though I don't know too much?
Yeah, no, I think it's never too late. I bump into people today who've, perhaps made the wrong career choice, and they're in their 30s and 40s, who are going back to university and studying computer science to get on the right track. So it's never too late. And I think at 17, 18, if you're finishing school and you're thinking this might be right for you, it's a great time to make that choice, for sure.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And it's a really exciting time, as you kind of highlighted with all of your examples, to be in computing. And there's so many parts of the world that computing touches on, that the web touches on, that software touches on. And you talked about sustainability, you talked about shopping, you talked about remote medicine. Is there something out there where we can't have an impact with computing?
I think where it's going to be hard for computing to have an impact is where there's sort of real, philosophical questions, really intuition and innovation. So I think people will play an incredibly important role in helping us sort of jump forward. But I think once we've jumped forward, then I think computers can come into play and help us sort of optimize and build great experiences. But I think, for example, if I go back to my story, I don't think a computer was going to invent infinite scroll. I think that required humans to really sort of think about how the world could be different. But once we sort of leapt to that point, then it was possible to sort of bring the power of computing and the power of experimentation together to really improve that experience and make that a good experience for everybody. In that particular example, it probably took us 5 minutes to have the idea and about 18 months to build it and test it and get it right so it was ready for consumers. So the intuition piece is really important, but I think there's always going to be a lot of hard work with computing too.
Yeah, there's a combination there, right, of recognizing that there's a problem that needs to be solved, but then working out how to solve it is that's the hard part. That's the hard work, and also thinking about who the users of that software are going to be and how it's going to affect their actions or their lives, and kind of really articulating how we can design the software to meet those needs, as well as address the kind of technical challenge of making it all work.
Yeah,
Google Maps
so right.
is a perfect example of that, right? It's all about gathering information for people who have specific needs, like they want to find the best Thai restaurant in their neighborhood, or they want to figure out the best way to get from their house to their next appointment. All of those things are really just problems that people have to solve, and we're using the technology to help us do that. So many opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the best people in our field are the ones that always keep that in mind, that always think about who's going to use the software and what problems are they trying to solve.
Yeah, and actually one of the questions from our audience relates to that. What the question is, what soft skills do you think that students need in computing?
Look, my old boss at eBay, he used to say to me that computing would be really easy if it wasn't for all the people involved. And so I think that's, and I guess he said that with a little bit of exasperation, as a senior executive managing thousands of people. But the best things that are done in our field are done by groups of people who work together hard as teams. And the best teams, the sum of their output is better than all of the individuals involved. And so I think it's incredibly important in computing to be able to work successfully with others, appreciate others' perspectives, allow everybody to bring their best to the table and really collaborate and create together. So while writing code is somewhat a solitary sport, you sort of can put on the headphones and write code, the best experiences overall that are created for customers bring together people from all sorts of different disciplines, and even the software engineers have to work together to build great software. And so I think soft skills are incredibly important. I think in particular, having empathy with others and understanding, what other people can bring to the table, giving everybody room to contribute, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. I think a lot of people think of computing, as you said, as a solitary activity where you're just sort of, interacting with the machine and trying to get the machine to do things. But my experience really resonates with what you said, in that we need, first of all, these software programs are often huge and they can't be written by just one person. So even the technical work of building the software requires a team effort, and that requires a lot of communication. It requires, talking to those users and getting the requirements, or the customers that need the product that you're building, and so there's just a ton of communication that has to happen in order to make it real.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm not sure that any of us in our careers all look back on those solitary moments of where we did something by ourselves. I think we all look back on the times when we were part of great teams and we achieved, great things as a group, and we've got somebody to share those experiences with. So I think that the group work, the teamwork in computing is actually the most exciting part for sure.
Yeah, and look, you touched on the diversity of the team that you worked with back at Microsoft on the image search, and I think, it's something I'm really passionate about as well, is having computing and IT kind of reflect the diversity of the world around us, because the whole world is using our products. And so if we have people at the table who can contribute their diversity of experience, we're going to end up hopefully with products that meet the needs of a broader range of people. And there's a question that's come through specifically around women in the tech sector, and that's a particular passion of mine, I suppose, being a woman and having had the experience of being in the minority group in many contexts in the IT world. But I wanted to know whether you could reflect a little bit on how the tech sector has changed in the time that you've been in it with respect to that diversity and recognition of the need for it.
I think it's a great question from the audience, and thanks for bringing it up. I think being honest and transparent, I think that the IT sector is not in great shape. I think it is making positive steps forward, but I think it's got a long way to go. I mean, if you look at the enrolments in the VCE into the software development course at VCE, it's about 15% female, about 85% male. And so, even today in a modern society, in a state like Victoria, we're clearly not seeing the gender diversity that we should be seeing, even in secondary school. So I think we've got a good ways to go, and I think it's going to take some time. But I think going back to my career, I think the best things that I've been involved in are the ones where the team was diverse. I think great software is not created by a bunch of white males. Great software is created by a diverse set of people who have empathy with each other and appreciate each other's perspectives. So I've personally always sought to be part of diverse teams and create diverse teams, but that is definitely challenging in computer science, given the the relatively smaller number of women who choose to study in the field. But flipping that on its head as an opportunity, I mean, if you are a young woman or a woman of any type who would like to be in this field, everybody wants you to be in this field. Everybody wants you to be part of their team and to help fix that diversity problem. And so I think that to some level there's a great opportunity for women in our field today, because everybody wants women in our field, and I think everybody wants to hire a more diverse pool of candidates, and I think that that's an opportunity. So I think you can look at the glass half empty and say, well, it's not diverse enough. I think you can also look at the glass half full and say, well, it's my chance to be part of creating a more diverse pool of folks in this field, and take advantage of that opportunity. And I genuinely hope that some of the women out there today do choose to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been a real shift in the recognition of the need for that diversity. It's not so much about just building the software. It's about having that software, as I said, kind of reflect the broader population. And I think you're right. Like, companies do want women and people of color and people from other underrepresented groups. They want them at the table now in a way that I don't think was really something they were as aware of even 5 years ago. So yeah, I agree. I also read in the most recent Digital Pulse survey that's done by Deloitte Access Economics, but on behalf of the Australian Computer Society. They talked about how there's a real need for IT and computing trained people in Australia, that we're having a shortage of people with these skills. And they actually specifically called out women as part of the answer to this problem, because if we can increase the number of women who choose to come into computing, particularly at mid-career, then we can start to fill in that skills gap in a way that if we just keep attracting the same people we've always attracted, we'll never close the gap, basically.
Yep, 100% right. I think we need to persuade more people to consider this as a career, and you certainly don't want half of the population not seeing this as a valid choice if that's the problem you're trying to address. Exactly. And I think it's great that RMIT appointed you as the dean, Karen. I think that's a fantastic example.
Thanks. Yeah, trying to do what I can to make sure the culture is welcoming for everybody, as many people as possible. This maybe gives me a chance to ask you about CS in schools, which I mentioned in your intro, and I think you briefly mentioned, but I wanted to ask you why you think it's so important for young people to learn how to code.
I think it's a fundamental life skill today. I think it's as important as having a great grounding in maths, English, science, whatever else you think is important. I mean, I think it is it's an essential skill. I think it's almost unarguable that every business in the world is going to be affected by computing if it hasn't been already. And I think even if you don't choose to study computing at university, and I do hope you do, but even if you don't choose to do that, it's an important thing to understand because it's going to affect the job that you do, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, a physiotherapist, whatever it is that you choose to do, it's going to be affected by computing, and having a fundamental understanding of how computers work is going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to have to wrap things up pretty soon. So if you've got last questions, please get them into the Q&A, and we'll try to take one more question if we can. I wanted to ask you, Hugh, about something which is a little more personal, and I hope you don't mind the question. You've been open in public about your experience with a pretty serious but rare neurological disease. And I wanted to ask you what opportunities you see for technology to impact health, or maybe, the experience that you had as a patient.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic question, Karen. Yeah, I had this rare thing called Guillain-Barré syndrome. I think the only famous person in Australia who's had it's Damien Hardwick. Not Damien Hardwick. Alistair Clarkson from Hawthorn. The coach of Hawthorn is the only sort of reasonably well-known person who's had it in Australia, but incredibly rare neurological condition. Fortunately, like Clarko, I've completely recovered from this particular condition. I think computing's only had a small effect on health, and so I do think there's an enormous opportunity for it to have a much more significant impact. I think the trick here, though, is sort of how do we embrace the fact that technology gets things wrong, and allow that to be okay in this field. So of course we accept, I think, that surgeons make mistakes, right? So we accept that it's okay very rarely for a surgeon to make a human error, as long as they get it right most of the time. I think we haven't quite got there with computing yet. We don't accept that computers can make mistakes and that could be okay in the field of medicine. And so I think that's a sort of fundamental kind of philosophical and regulatory sort of question that we need to make progress on. And then I think there can be, a more significant impact from computing in the realm of health. But what I would say today very practically is that, in every field there's an enormous amount of data, and often that data isn't used as powerfully as it could be to enhance the experience of the people who are in that field. And so I think health is one of those areas where there's lots of silos of data created by all the machines and people who work in that field. So whether it's, the X-ray machine or the MRI machine or the test that the doctor did or the conversation that lots of people have had with their doctor about the same topic, I think those data assets could be better unified and better used to drive better outcomes for patients today, of course, with respect to people's privacy. But I think that's an enormous opportunity. So I think health is definitely one of those areas that hasn't been really revolutionized by computing, but I'm sure it's one that will change enormously in our lifetime.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it is the area that I work in, so a little bit of a shameless plug for AI in medicine. But yeah, you're totally right. This question of the limitations of the algorithms and even the lack of data that they have access to, those are technical problems that we need to solve. Infrastructure that allows us to connect different data sets together so that we can gain that insight into patient journeys and patient symptoms, and support the doctors or the clinical teams that are treating patients, particularly with those complex and rare diseases like what you had, which really require, bringing lots of information together in order to come up with the best plan for treatment and so on. Yeah, exciting times.
Indeed.
Well, I'm afraid we need to wrap up. I would like to say thank you, sincere thanks to you, Hugh, for sharing your story. I hope it's inspired a number of people in the audience to consider a career in computing. It's a fantastic journey that you've been on, and so many exciting opportunities ahead. It was really wonderful to hear from you about that. Any final thoughts you want to share with our audience?
No, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And I just hope that there's at least somebody out there who's going to put RMIT computing as one of the RMIT computing offerings as their first choice in their preferences, and have the opportunity to come to RMIT University and perhaps go on a similar journey to many of the graduates of RMIT and really get out there and change the world. There's never been a better time to choose computing than today. So I hope that some of you make that choice.
Thanks so much, Hugh. I mean, what an inspiring role model, and so wonderful to hear from you. So if you are interested in coming and learning about studying computing or IT at RMIT University, we have an information session this afternoon at 2 o'clock, which you are welcome to join. And we'll be telling you a little bit more about the specific program options that we have available to you at that time. And so maybe we'll see you there. And otherwise, I'd just like to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at RMIT. Thanks. Bye, everyone.